Well, why don't we get started? My name's Ric Strangway. I'm the host of the Simpson Conversations. About a year ago or so, we had at Ambrose University a series of symposium that came out of COVID that focused particularly on theological ideas and concepts that we would explore with a little bit of depth. So we've shifted that because really our desire has always been to serve the greater conversation, the practice of ministry in the local church and the Christian Missionary Alliance in Canada. So we've shifted it this year to what we refer to as Simpson Conversations that focus on faith, pastoral ministry, leadership in the local church, and the kind of things that really matter as we seek to serve Christ fully in all of our callings and all of our roles in all of our ways. So I'm grateful that you've joined us today. I'll encourage each of you as you kind of jump in and jump on that you will maybe mute yourselves and just so allow us to be able to handle the conversation well as we kind of move forward. Couple of things that you might want to just be aware of. We will have a few more conversations in the next few months. In December 3rd, there's a conversation about digital community. As we've moved out of COVID and we've talked about digital ministry, we want to move forward and talk about digital community in ways that we can think about church and the expansiveness of the church to the online ministries that so many local churches have. So be thinking about that. That's on December 3rd, and that's with our president, Bryce Ashland Mayo, and Pastor Corey Harasum from First Alliance here in Calgary, who has a fairly extensive ministry that's happening within our online community. Later, we find in the new year, we'll be picking up a conversation about the pastor as a theologian. While so many of us, and particularly in our Alliance story, are practitioners in the local church, we find ourselves again and again focusing in on the practice of ministry, the various concerns, the discipling of many, and we think about that challenge, but we maybe miss out the opportunity. And I'll just encourage a couple of you to maybe think about just muting yourselves. Might be helpful. Um, uh, and so, yeah, on January 14th, we'll have talking about the pastor as a theologian. You can register for all those on our Ambrose website. In the Alliance in Canada, we have a strategic framework that's critical and it's been laid out more fully this summer at our assembly that talks about the flourishing of churches, the development of leaders. And today's conversation is so critical to that as we embrace the reality of structures of church, of ministry, of pastoral leadership, of volunteer elders leadership, of various roles that are taking on the church and various participants that step into the ministry of the church. And so today we talk about safe ministry in Canada and how this initiative have started. And we have two guests that I'm going to introduce just by name briefly and then invite them to tell us a little bit about ourselves. And then we'll get into this bigger topic or conversation, safe ministry in the Alliance. And so we will be doing that here in a moment. And so let me just welcome Elke Carlson, who's the National Director of Safe Ministry with the Alliance, and Tracey Dickie, a clinical therapist that serves out of southern Vancouver, the greater Vancouver area in White Rock, and she's on the Safe Ministry team with the Alliance. And the two of them just have a wealth of knowledge that we get to hear a little bit as they kind of share a bit about the bigger picture of things and then delve into a few things that I think will be practical and helpful for us. So Elke, would you mind introducing yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe a couple of things that you think might be important for our listeners or our viewers today, and then I'll turn it over to you, Tracey, to do the same.
Well, hello, thanks, Ric. My name is Elke. It's nice to be able to be here and for you guys also to come into this room. It's awesome to be able to share what's been on my heart and what I've been working at with the Alliance for the last 2 years. So I'm a mom of two amazing men, now men. One's a graduate actually from Ambrose, and the other is at Briarcrest. So as you can see, I love learning from their experience and learning what they're doing as well. I am also married to my best friend Darwin. It's been this year we'll be celebrating our fifth year, so that is going to be exciting for us too. Some of the things that, over these years, I've had a lot of fortunate opportunities to work in various type of careers. So I've worked with horses in equine therapy, working with the vulnerable population, different cultures, and then also children's ministry. And then I was a first responder. I worked with the Calgary Police.
Oh.
And then also on the board at Foothills Alliance in Calgary. However, I just moved, literally fresh off the press. This is my first 2 weeks in our new home. And so we are outside of the city now. Yeah, so just lots of just different things have molded and shaped, and like all of our experiences has built up skills to put me in this position. I'm a very passionate studier of theology, most specifically Trinitarian theology. So that's where I like to spend a lot of my spare time. And you asked, Rick, why is this conversation important to me? Uh, I think that everyone deserves a safe place to meet and experience Jesus. That's really where my heart is. Life has many twists and turns, and sometimes we get hurt. And my heart for people to be reconciled, to be with God, um, even in the midst of tragedy and pain and hurt, is really important to me. It's not easy work. But I don't believe that putting things, there's an expression, shoving things under the rug. I don't think that's profitable, or even just good for our relationship with our Heavenly Father. So that's sort of one of the things that drives me each day, is for people to have that chance to see God at work.
Great, thank you. And Tracey, would you introduce yourself a little bit, who you are, and a bit of your background?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Rick, and thanks for having us here today. My name's Tracey Dickie, and I live in South Surrey, White Rock area, and have been at Peace Portal Alliance Church here for 28 years. So my husband, Scott, started as a youth pastor 28 years ago and has now been the lead pastor for, I think it's about 10 years. But I was fortunate enough when we moved out here, I was doing my master's in counseling at Trinity Western University. And pretty much as soon as I graduated, the lead pastor at the time, Ross Hastings, had a vision to start a counseling center. And so I got hired right away. So I've been working to varying degrees, from kind of very part-time to full-time, at different stages of my life over the past 26 years. And we have 3 now adult children. So our oldest just got married in May and moved out at that time. And he's an emergency room nurse. So I feel old because I look at him and I think, should you really be keeping people alive? Because I've seen your bedroom and I'm not sure you should have this job, but he's doing great. And then 2 more are both at Trinity Western University right now. One is they're there for sports, rugby and volleyball, and I think they're doing school on the side. So so I guess my interest in, I love working with people. I've loved being a therapist all these years, but about 6 years ago, I went and worked with the Workers' Compensation Board for British Columbia WorkSafe BC. And it was there that I really came to see the impact of trauma on people and how trauma affected people when they were engaging with systems and organizations, that sort of thing. And so automatically my mind started shifting to, the church, and how does trauma show up for us in our churches? How are we responding to it? Very passionate about psychologically safe and healthy workplaces. And I'm currently just being certified in that area. But again, being a Christian, I automatically think, what is a psychologically safe church? So, Yeah, I met Elke, got kind of connected to her, and just has been really exciting opportunity for me to get involved with her and just supporting what she's doing. She's doing a great job of leading this very large, somewhat new area. So thanks for having us, Ric.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Thank you for that introduction. That's appreciated. Let's jump in. Elke, I mean, when I was a local church pastor a few years ago, maybe even 10 years ago or so, language of trauma, language of how to deal with certain situations probably wasn't always a part of my capacity or my understanding. So maybe the place for us to start today is what is safe ministry? And kind of what's your role? Because you play such a key role in something that's really developing and important right now in the Alliance in Canada.
Yeah, for sure. Basically, I work in two different arenas where abuse can occur. So in our churches and in our management. Abuse, first of all, is just so we're on the same page, abuse is a misuse of power. And it's also a violation of trust. And this can be evident in our ministries. It can be evident in our churches, and as well as how we manage. So let's say our staff, so it kind of has those two branches. I call it safe church and safe ministry for simplicity. Churches are to be a safe place for people to encounter God. Our God is safe. He's trusting. He cares for us. Church is a place where people can encounter, where they're welcome to experience God. And as pastors and leaders, we want to foster and welcome people for that purpose, so they can meet our God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, or I love the Alliance, the foretold gospel, right? King, Savior, Healer, Sanctifier, so that they can be a part of that. Safe management is more about integrity in our workplaces. For us as pastors, ministry leaders, it does involve a lot of HR practices. But my role is securing those accountabilities in our systems, in the functioning of our policies and so forth. So it's a little bit more of that governance policy side of things.
That's helpful to kind of get those two perspectives and the two different kind of functions of the ministry. Maybe I'll ask this question. I know I have a follow-up question, kind of where do you spend your time? But first, could you answer, like, when did Safe Ministry kind of begin? What was the initial kind of start? And how long have you had this role?
For sure. Um, I contribute this role coming from the voices of survivors' cases. I think the Alliance has boldly created this initiative, hiring someone like a director of safe ministry, and creating policies. Creating that kind of infrastructure is the beginning of trying to address some things that have occurred. We'll talk later on about kind of realizing and recognizing that it does happen, and how we handle people who have experienced trauma is also super important. So there's two folds to my role, as well as to understanding. But yeah, the Alliance has really done a lot of work before I came. So I came about 2 years ago, and there and my role has been actively with our reporting systems and with those policies that they put into place.
And where do you kind of where are you spending your time? I know there's a couple key things that kind of interface with the local church or with people who've gone through abuse and that kind of thing. Where are you putting your time and energy primarily?
It is at both the local and district levels. Mostly, I spend a lot of time, or the largest portion of my time, managing the two main reporting systems, mechanisms that we have on the website. So there's a report abuse and a whistleblower. They call it the infamous the buttons. And so I manage a lot of the cases, the calls are coming in, while also leading and developing our leaders in these areas of how to handle complaints, how to address concerns. When handling abuse in particular, there is a high chance that the reporter has experienced trauma. And so being trauma aware in our response is super important. So that takes a lot of my time, as well as it takes people. I'm not in the church with them. So
Brilliant.
guiding the church, the local church, or even the district who's supporting the church, that takes a lot of my time. And then I also do training, equipping, and developing like workshops and so forth on power management, trauma awareness, fairness in our complaint handling, and clarity with our systems and policies. So I have a lot of focus right now and just sort of ensuring that our policies make sense.
Yeah. That's helpful to kind of get that 20,000-foot view of things and just kind of what's happened and where this has kind of come from, even just briefly.
Mhm.
So if we are to kind of get into the conversation a little bit deeper, like what is safe ministry and maybe what is it not? Like how would you describe when we think about what it looks like or the kind of language you'd begin to put around it? If I was a local church pastor just beginning to have a conversation with you, how would you describe safe ministry and again, what isn't
But it's
it?
not. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. So safe ministry focuses, it does focus on that abuse in the church. It really highlights realizing, recognizing, and responding to abuse. And again, remember, abuse is a violation of trust as well as a misuse or abuse of power. And it includes minors. However, the focus is on vulnerable adults more often than not. So there's this prevention side, um, but it's not like working in children's ministry. It focuses on the best practices on handling abuse with a trauma-aware response. Sometimes it is the pastors that are abusing, like it does happen, but I think more often the issues get exacerbated when we don't handle those cases appropriately. And this is where we see a lot of re-traumatization and causing more damage by not realizing, recognizing, and responding to abuse appropriately. So there's this unconscious way that we have been responding that we are needing to keep up to speed. So that's really the what's it is not. It's not just about prevention. It is about how are we doing complaint handling well with a trauma aware a trauma aware response.
Yeah, I mean, that's helpful because, and that goes back to what you said a couple of minutes ago. Um, we aren't just, or you aren't just trying to focus on the issues that are rising, but you're trying to get behind that and talk about giving us all an awareness and understanding, and then education and helping us even become a little bit more comfortable with some of the policies and procedures so that we can create those safe spaces, healthy spaces, flourishing spaces for ministry to happen in the church. So I know you've said this, but I just want to kind of bear down on this maybe a little bit deeper. Like what does a safe ministry or a safe place look like, Elke? Like especially in a ministry context in a local church. Can you give us kind of a good picture of what it is or what that is when it's happening?
When it's happening,
Yeah.
yeah. You know, I think you just actually said it in many ways. A safe place, a safe church is where you see life and growth in Christ, where there is flourishing, where there is a reconciliation to God, a fellowship, and opportunities for people to experience God. These all occur in safe places. Um, like I said at the beginning, safe places for opportunity to meet Jesus. So it,
Yeah.
there's different ways, but we can see when it's not.
Hmm.
And I think that is we're where we're trying to learn together and realize that safe places is a commitment from the whole community. It's not just one person. I am not the only I cannot create safe place for someone else's church. I can guide, but we all have to participate
Hmm.
in that. Does
Yeah.
that answer your
Yeah,
your
it does.
question?
And I'm thinking from the place of I'm a member at a local church. I used to be a pastor. I care like everyone does in this room about this conversation, and I like the way you kind of ended it. Like you're helping us think and giving us better language, and then practices and so on, policy as we enter into this. Tracey, I'd love to maybe, get a bit of your thoughts just as we initially get into this kind of, what would you want to add here? What would you kind of want to speak into? Because you come from, some very specific kind of knowledge base around trauma and experience, but you also are deeply embedded in the local church. So any thoughts as we kind of get into this?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Rick. I think that what stands out to me when I think about a safe place, right? And I think, um, for pastors and leaders in the local church, I think that could maybe feel a bit overwhelming to think, oh my goodness, like, how do I create a safe place? And can become fearful, right? And how can I be trauma aware if we have all these people coming to our church? And I think what I would want to highlight is that a safe place doesn't mean we don't say the wrong thing. And it doesn't mean that, we can make sure that nobody ever, experiences hurt in our church or that sort of thing. To me, a safe place really is about, it's a place where we can have conversation. And I think I describe it as, a place of compassionate curiosity, both with ourselves and with those we come into contact with. Um, there's a saying, when we talk about being trauma informed, which isn't what we're looking at here, but the idea of, in my work, it's all about being trauma informed. And there's a saying, that rather than looking at someone and saying, what's wrong with you? So maybe that person who's always complaining at the church or sending the emails and always seems to be upset, rather than, responding defensively or being frustrated, saying, what's wrong with you? That we say, what's happened to you? And there's a sense of curiosity towards people who are struggling or, and I said to Elke, I always think of one time Scott was preaching and afterwards, I mean, people come up and talk to him about things, quite regularly. But one time someone came up and was quite upset by something that he said, and how it kind of came across to her. And, I think a safe place was that his response was, oh my goodness, like, thanks for letting me know. I, that wasn't my intent. And I'm really sorry that, that came across. And yeah, I'll be careful with, a story that I tell. So just in that our unawareness, but just not being defensive, right? I think it becomes unsafe when we take things personally all the time, or we have our own responses to people and then become defensive and end up telling people, well, you're wrong, or you shouldn't feel that way, or, well, I didn't mean it that way. And that is unsafe for people, right? It doesn't invite us to have a conversation and feel heard.
That's really, really helpful. And I think of probably A number of different conversations go through my mind. I wish I would have heard this or had this conversation 20, 30 years ago. Or maybe my wife was saying, wish I would have had this information a few minutes ago. But I think about just as you talk, like it's compassion, it's listening, it's not kind of be on my back foot and being fearful or feel, but being curious. It's about having it's a posture towards a deeper story in somebody who comes towards us. Can you go a little bit further into trauma and kind of help us understand what that is? Because that's not something we were talking about a few years ago, or sorry, from a pastoral, maybe leadership, elder kind of type role. But help us maybe get our head around a little bit more basic information when we talk about trauma.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm going to admit that I actually had, initially a negative response to trauma being such a buzzword in our society. It's like everyone's talking about trauma and everyone's traumatized, and we talk big T, little t, all of that. And I mean, what I've come to realize is that looking through the lens of trauma makes a lot of sense, and it helps us understand a lot of human behavior. And that the statistics say it's basically close to 70%, excuse me, of adults will have experienced
Wow.
a traumatic event in their life. That doesn't mean that 70% of people are walking around with post-traumatic stress disorder, but it does mean that they will have experienced that. And that's a high percentage. And if you think of our churches, when we talk about trauma, there's lots of different ways to look at it. And I could spend days talking about it. So I'll try to keep it really simple. But, trauma can be a one-time acute incident. Most common is a motor vehicle accident, a sexual assault. There's chronic trauma, or we sometimes call it complex trauma, which is that ongoing experience, which would be the adverse childhood experiences. So abuse, growing up in a home where there's substance abuse, neglect, those sorts of ongoing experiences. It can also be in a workplace, right? If somebody's experiencing bullying and harassment on an ongoing basis in a workplace, that can cause trauma. Lots of different things that cause trauma. I think what I would want to say today about trauma is just that it impacts us on a biological level. So we think of, trauma and some of the things that result, like depression, anxiety, PTSD, as mental illnesses. But trauma impacts us on a biological level. So when someone experiences trauma, and it's the way God created us, right? Which is to protect ourselves.
Yeah.
And so when we experience threat, our body automatically releases, adrenaline, and we go into this fight, flight, freeze mode, right? And that is how we were created. But when you experience trauma, what happens is your system can either get stuck in that response, or at the very least, it becomes kind of hyper aroused, so that things that aren't necessarily a threat will be experienced as a threat by somebody who has a history of trauma. So that's why, people who have experienced trauma, they may seem overly sensitive to us, right? And so, the unhelpful response is like, oh, that person, they're always, they're so sensitive. Why do they take everything? Well, maybe, right? Be curious, and maybe they've got a history of trauma. And so they quickly go into this fight or flight mode, right? Yeah. And if you think of fight or flight or freeze, you think of, fight can be aggressive, trying to control, overcome. Flight can be, we withdraw, we leave relationships, those sorts of things. So
yeah, that's really helpful. And it probably piques a number of questions, and I'll just encourage, I'm sure now we won't be able to get to everyone's questions later, but feel free to put a question in the chat, and I'll try in about 20 minutes or so to pick some of those questions up. But that's helpful, and there might be even some things that you might even want to recommend that we should be thinking or reading after this. But as pastors or church leaders or people who sit on a board or key volunteers, as they are serving in the local church, what Tracey, do they need to be aware of? Like how I mean, yeah, what's maybe some of the first things that we need to be thinking of as leaders who really care about safe ministry and the flourishing of people and the good news of Jesus Christ? But getting into this, where do we start?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is to not be afraid of it, even though, it's new, and that to just be curious even about this idea of trauma and being a trauma-friendly community for people, and just to get curious about it. And I think it always starts with ourselves, right? And I think it can feel unsafe being a pastor, right? I always say, in a lot of professions, your personal life is very separate from your work life. But as a pastor, to be able to be vulnerable yourself, right, about the things that are going on for you, it can be scary. And so I think it starts with ourselves. And if 70% of us have experienced trauma, that means 70% of our pastors have. And so getting to know our own trauma responses, right? And that's a lifelong learning. But it's looking at ourselves going, oh, why does, Mrs. So-and-so just make me so angry, right? Why does my body respond so much to certain types of people or certain situations? What's going on in me when I feel defensive or when I feel threatened? I really think that is the first place to start, so that because I think hurt people, right? And I don't think any of us want to intend to hurt people, but I think we do if we don't understand our own responses. So I think it's taking that time to get to know yourself, and then relationships for yourself, creating your own safe places on your teams, right? And if you're leading a church, within that church culture, that it's safe to look at ourselves. And then I think just that curiosity towards people, and just wanting to understand, what's happened to people. And you don't have to be a therapist, right? And even if someone comes and discloses some kind of, sexual misconduct to you, right? Our job is just to respond with empathy. And you don't have to be the investigator. That's why we have Elke is hired, right? Or if you have questions, you can go to Elke. That's why she's here. And so I think for pastors to know you're not alone in this, and it's new, but you don't have to do it all, but just if your initial response is one of compassionate curiosity, you will have done well by the people in your congregation.
Yeah, thank you for that, like, wisdom and the practicality, because this is really challenging for so many as we think about it, and just the way you broke that down and then lead us to compassion and curiosity towards others, and then the support, and thanks to our national leadership team and Elke and your role in helping us and this posture towards us or people in the local church. Elke, like, maybe you want to pick up on something Tracey said, or maybe you want to just respond to this question. Like, when we think about what does it look like then to create a safe space for ministry in a church, what might you kind of help us kind of get a picture of in more detail?
For sure. I'm just going to pick up one thing that Tracey had mentioned, and are to not be fearful of reporting. I think that the hope is that in responding in a trauma aware way, having that compassionate curiosity, there's also the diligence of reporting, believing their story is through reporting and helping them with that. So that's another big one.
Can I just jump in just to be clear then? So if someone feels that they're in a place, and I just want to almost state the obvious that we probably all know, but just that if someone feels they're in a place where they've been abused or misuse of trust or power, and they go to an Alliance Church or the national website and they click on that button, can you explain what happens next? Like, who gets, if I'm the one who does that and reports, who knows about what I'm saying? Can you just help me understand that?
Yeah, it's I don't want to use the word confidentiality flippantly. I look at when the report does come to me, I'm the only one that sees that report, and I reach out to right now we're using the word complainant. I like the word reporter. That the reporter, that they have a safe place to tell their story. It is their story, and we don't move into investigation or anything like that because it's their story. They need to be informed about process. They need to be informed of where they want to go. But that's a super important thing, is that they need a safe place to tell their story, but they also need to have some guidance and choice. So that's what that time is about.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. That's helpful just to be clear, and even as we communicate that to those in our communities and our congregations and that kind of thing. So creating a safe place for ministry. Can you kind of jump into that a little bit more?
For sure. Uh, Creating safe places for like what does that look like?
Yeah, yeah.
As Tracey mentioned, it does start with yourself. Simply put, learn about your vulnerabilities and your leadership style. How do you manage power? Do you have trauma responses yourself? So that self-awareness is very important. Um, and creating supports. The second is also this idea of realizing not only that abuse occurs or that it could occur consciously or unconsciously. Okay, when we respond in compassionate curiosity, even we aren't always, like Tracey said, we aren't always going to get it right. But realize that that it could occur. And when abuse occurs, it takes people away from church. Let's not forget that. And that's super important. And so tolerating, making excuses only exacerbates that impact of hurt, of damage, of an incident, or anything like that. So first thing is the self. Second is realizing and recognizing that these things do happen. And third is recognize too that there are a lot of hurting people in the congregation. I always, I love the compassionate curiosity, but when I look at people, I want to find out more about their story. There's a lot of hurting people and a lot of people who've experienced trauma. So let's learn about it. We need to, as leaders, invest some time. And this is actually a missional. I see this as missional as well as being a better pastor, a better leader. And then finally is reporting. I just mentioned that. Yeah, that is also a way to create safety for that person because it's their story. I think as pastors, and ministry leaders, we always have to solve problems, don't we? We always have to fix things. And when we're talking about abuse, when we're talking about the experiences someone has had and are impacted by trauma, we're there to walk alongside them. We aren't there to fix. And that's why we say that if, if there is a traumatic experience, someone has experienced, they should see a counselor. So we recognize something there, but realize that it's not there to fix. How do we as leaders walk alongside someone? We help them report. And in that reporting, I think that would be a total another session, but what happens in our process? The first thing is we create initial safety plan. What is safe for both parties as we go through the next stages? So and of course we can't forget, you ask about how can leaders create safe places, continue to learn. There's tons of books out there. I really liked Diane Landberg's Redeeming Power. I know Tracey has a whole list as well. But part of being curious is also being curious about trauma, their signs, their impact. Again, the question, not what's wrong with you, what's happened to you, really helps reframe your mind. You don't have to say it that way, but in your mind, what has happened? Why are they physically moving away when I ask that question? Why are they, so that type of curiosity. And then listening, looking for those clues, like I mentioned, looking for signs that you may think are kind of odd or not normal, but they may actually be some exasperated responses because of trauma. And then if in doubt, you hear, I'm sure everyone in this room hears, if you work with people, we hear a lot of stories. So sometimes we don't know. And so if in doubt, just come and connect with me, contact me. I'll be able to help just ask some more questions even. We can't just do it alone. Let's look at it with some other eyes. And then also I can help with just if we have to engage in a process or report to police, that's the first thing that needs to be looked at. I'll be able to guide you through that.
That's a really, really helpful. And and thank you for the generosity of your time, because I can only imagine for each of you in different ways, like the amount of time you could give to this conversation or to individuals or to guiding leaders in the local church is immense. So thanks for that, Elke. Can I just swing back? And I know, like you said, we could probably have a couple of sessions, and maybe down the road we will. Like maybe it's worth investing into this conversation again, like 12 months down the road, and kind of what do we learn now type of a thing. But at the local church, as we think about it, what kind of processes you mentioned something like a plan, a health safety plan that could be in place. What kind of other things can you help us with? Like, do we need to have policies in place? Can you give a couple other suggestions that leadership can be thinking forward, and how do they begin to do that? Or is there anything else?
Yeah, specifically, even within this initial, I label it as one thing, initial safety plan. It involves quite a bit. It's hearing a story. That's sort of my side, but I need to decide if the policy applies. And then from there, okay, for elders who are around the room, for the lead pastors, if you're not involved, maybe it's within your church, but you are not the respondent. There's a lot of participation. We need to think about how do we keep our church safe throughout these concerns, these allegations that were brought forward. Do we have support people for both parties? We've talked a lot about our reporter, but there's another side where we have, we label it as respondent, but there's some care that is super important throughout, notifying them that an allegation came. What are during the next stages, what are the conditions? What are those safety measures that need to be taken in place? Should they be talking to one another, not to each other? No. So there's a lot of conversation at the elders and lead pastor level, and even the district superintendent, as they help guide through this. So those first initial, once something like sexual misconduct has occurred, and I always use the word not if, but when. These are the only ones that are brave enough to come forward.
Right.
I think media itself has shown that it happens more often than we know and think. So yeah, that's sort of one area to kind of think of is that once it is reported, there are a lot together we have to move forward. Yes, we don't do investigations in the church. That is not, remember, the pastor's job is not to investigate, to fix. However, you're still having two parties who are in conflict. How do we keep community during that time? So lots of things, lots of details to be a trauma-informed or trauma-aware response. But that's one thing to think about, is when we do report, there's quite a bit, and it's not easy. So knowing yourself, knowing your supports around, and also being engaged in the training will be helpful if this ever does occur at your church.
Yeah. Well, and obviously we on one hand would say we hope it doesn't, but we recognize just the clear comments that you've given us and our own awareness and ministry that it is happening. And so thank you. I just say thank you again to both of you for being the kind of people that model the service to Christ and his kingdom and the local church and the Christian Missionary Alliance, and caring about people and making yourself available. Because that, I think, is it's the local church leader, pastor, feels so overwhelmed sometimes with so much stuff that's coming at them, and then making good decisions in times of crisis, but then also having that heart that you shared earlier, Tracey, about just having that compassionate curiosity of what's happening here, what's the story here in somebody's life. So I really appreciate that. Tracey, do you have any, Elke kind of set you up on resources. Do you have any suggestions of where can we go? Like, this is just beginning. We're just kind of dipping our toe into the water here. But what else could we be thinking if we wanted to take this and learn a little bit more, or think a bit more? Or I'm sure you have a 9-week course that you're developing online. Maybe not, but.
We're working on developing some stuff for sure.
Oh, good.
I think there's more in the States than there is in Canada right now, but we're behind. I think right now it's mostly some books, right? And I always hesitate to recommend books because, there might be something in there that doesn't line up for someone. But our recommendations, especially coming from me, I'll say I have worked more in the secular realm. And so you can take what you like and leave the rest, as the saying goes, but just to learn about trauma. But some of the Redeeming Power is good. I think a church called Tove by Scott McKnight. There is a book, and I can put it in. She's actually a Canadian woman. The book's called Evolve, but it's the path to trauma-informed leadership. And I mean, there's in February a big conference down in Phoenix that's got basically the leading people speaking on church abuse, sexual misconduct, all of that. So there will be more and more of those things. Podcasts, the Royce Report, Julie Royce, she has some great people on there. A fellow named Chuck McGroat, I think is his name. Anyways,
he wrote When Narcissism Comes to Your Church.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a whole other topic. So we can put some in the chat here as well.
I'd like to also add, we do have a conference with the EFC. There's a network for abuse leaders who are trying to address abuse in their churches in different denominations, and it's called Reducing the Risk. It is already on November 2nd for anyone who is out east. It's at Willowdale Baptist Church, I believe, but it is on the EFC website. And we hope to do that on Western Canada's side as well, but it has a great lineup about healthy boundaries, about insurance, really geared for our leaders.
That's good. Really, really helpful.